Statistics are shocking. So our evidence shows around a third of children are living in families where violence is part of that home life. One study we produced looked at children aged 12 to 13, where it was around 35% were living in a context of family violence, and of that group, 25% were persistent. So these are not one-off instances. This is part of a coercive and a controlling and an abusive home life. But more broadly, we've seen in a study looking at 18 to 65-year-olds now across Australia that 40% of people grew up in a context of family violence. So that's 2 in 5 children.
And that demonstrates, I guess, the generational cycle that can happen here, where that violence then can continue.
That's right, and so part of the pattern is the abuse that children are experiencing now, either witnessing or exposed to themselves, but also the impacts of that. So we see in a context of mental health that children who are living in a context of family violence are much more likely to need mental health services. We see a 2-fold increase in the risks of alcohol and drug or other substance abuse. We see the patterns of experiencing victimisation reflected in who goes on to offend. So in one analysis of young boys in juvenile justice, particularly for young sex offenders, almost half of them had themselves experienced family violence at home. So it's both the immediate impact of that violence in children's lives and what it then shapes in terms of how they think about relationships and how they relate to others.
What's the experience of children when they go through the justice and the court system?
For too long, we did not pay enough attention to children in their own right. Now, I say for too long because we're starting to see changes there. We've seen recent reforms, particularly in the family court, that recognise the interests of children and prioritise safety where that wasn't always the priority. But more broadly, we've got a lot more work to do. I think the other thing to recognise, though, is that very few cases will actually come into the justice system. So we know only about a third of instances of family violence, or particularly child abuse, are reported to police or to child protection. So the justice system is only one part of the response and the points of intervention or the points of support that we need to be looking at.
When we look at the points of support, they might be in place, but how accessible are they to the people who really need them?
It's mixed, is the short answer. So there's some evidence from some of our research that shows from the identification of family violence, it can take children 6 years to receive mental health support. Now, for anyone, that is too long. But if you think about children, particularly in that age group 6 to 12, the development that's occurring, we're missing windows. We're absolutely missing opportunities. And then more broadly, there's, I think often when we think about violence, we think about child protection. If we think about abuse, we think about identifying risk and removing children from that situation. But actually, there's a whole lot of other touch points in the service system that can be points of early intervention. So where are mums and children coming into contact with healthcare, child and maternal health services, particularly for our bubs, but healthcare more broadly? Where is early childhood education and opportunity to just assess safety at home and to know how to support families when they need help? Where are families in touch with schools? And so that's a sort of trusted place where we can provide support if it's needed. So I think we need to recognise there's a role for specialist services, but no matter what we do with those specialist services, families are going to be coming into touch with services in a whole broader range of areas, and those are points of help.
Why is it that you think children are often forgotten in this discussion? And when we're talking about breaking that generational cycle, how important is it that they're not forgotten?
I'm thinking about some research we did where a mother was talking about having been pulled in 2 different directions by the services that were supposedly there to help. So the child protection authorities were saying to her, if your child comes into contact with their father again, we will remove the child from the family. At the same time as the family court was saying, your child has to be able to see both parents. So there is a challenge for systems to understand what it looks like to support children in their own rights, to understand safety and to listen to children's voices. And we need to get much better at doing that.
Tessa Boyd Caine, we really appreciate you coming in and speaking to us. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
And if this story has raised any issues for you, you can get help by calling the National Sexual Assault and Family Violence Counselling Helpline. That's 1800 RESPECT, which is 1800 737 737.